Dodge took the 426 cubic inch Hemi, the most powerful production engine in America, and squeezed it into a compact dart that weighed several hundred pounds less than any car that had ever carried it. Then they handed the buyer a piece of paper that said, in plain language, the drivetrain is not covered. No warranty, no factory support. If the engine scattered at 6,000 revolutions per minute on your third pass down the strip, you swept up the pieces yourself. The year was 1968. Roughly 80 were ever made. Every one was sold to someone who understood exactly what they were getting. This is the Dodge so brutal they sold it without a promise. By the mid-1960s, American drag racing had become something no manufacturer originally planned for. What started as weekend entertainment on measured quarter miles had turned into a full-blown corporate war. General Motors, Ford, and Chrysler were all pouring serious engineering resources into cars that existed for a single purpose: win on the strip and sell in the showroom. The superstock classes of the National Hot Rod Association had become the proving ground, and the rules were deceptively simple. You had to race something a regular customer could theoretically walk into a dealership and buy. No prototypes, no one-off engineering exercises. If you wanted to race it, you had to catalog it and build enough to qualify. That rule changed everything. If Chrysler wanted faster cars on the strip, they could not just develop them behind closed doors. They had to assign a regular production order code and sell them through the dealer network. The car had to exist on paper as something a civilian could purchase. What nobody had specified was how many you had to build, how comfortable it had to be, or whether it needed to be suitable for anything beyond a quarter mile of straight pavement. The manufacturers found that gap in the rules and went straight through it. By 1967, every major player in Detroit was building what amounted to race cars with street paperwork, and the question was no longer whether it was reasonable. The question was how far you were willing to go. Chrysler had already shown its hand. The big block wedge engines and eventually the Hemi had made Plymouth and Dodge competitive at the top of the superstock ladder. But competitive was not the same as dominant. Ford was investing heavily in its own lightweight programs. General Motors had engineers who understood weight reduction as well as anyone in the business. Staying ahead required something more aggressive than another engine tune. It required rethinking which car the engine went into. The engine at the center of this story had already rewritten the rules once before. Chrysler introduced the 426 cubic inch Hemi in 1964, and from the day it arrived, it changed every assumption about how much power a production-based engine could make. The hemispherical combustion chambers that gave it its name allowed for larger valves set at opposing angles, which moved air through the cylinder head more efficiently at high RPM than any conventional wedge head design of the era. The trade-off was complexity. The Hemi required dual rocker shafts per cylinder head, a more involved valve train, and considerably more machining time on the production line. It was expensive to build and expensive to maintain. None of that mattered on a drag strip. In its street-legal configuration, the 426 was rated at 425 horsepower. Everyone in the industry understood the real number was higher. Chrysler rated it conservatively because insurance companies were already scrutinizing horsepower figures, and because the true output on a dynamometer was the kind of number that invited regulatory attention. In full race trim, with open headers and an aggressive camshaft, the Hemi could produce well over 500 horsepower, and it had the structural integrity to survive the punishment. The block was heavy, overbuilt by design, and practically indestructible under loads that would crack a lesser casting in half. That strength was also its central limitation. Fully dressed, the 426 Hemi was an enormously heavy engine, and in 1967, it lived exclusively in the B-body platform, the full-sized Coronets and Belvederes that Dodge and Plymouth fielded in superstock. Those were big cars, fast in a straight line, but dragging hundreds of pounds of body weight that served no purpose on the strip except slowing everything down. The arithmetic was straightforward. You could keep extracting more power from the Hemi, but every additional horsepower cost more to find and brought the internals closer to their structural limits. Or you could take weight off the car. 100 fewer pounds on a vehicle running in the tens at the quarter mile was worth more than a moderate horsepower increase. And it was cheaper, more reliable, and far less likely to scatter engine parts across the pavement at well over 100 miles per hour. Ford already understood this. General Motors understood it. The advantage that the Hemi held on raw power was being eaten alive by the weight penalty of the cars that carried it. What Chrysler needed was the smallest, lightest body they manufactured, something that would let the Hemi do what it was capable of without hauling 2 tons of sheet metal along for the ride. The A-body Dart was roughly 500 pounds lighter than the Coronet. On paper, that translated directly into faster elapsed times and higher trap speeds. In practice, it meant solving a packaging problem that Chrysler's own engineers had deliberately avoided for years. The engine bay of the Dart had been designed around inline sixes and small block V8s. The Hemi was wider, taller, and several hundred pounds heavier than anything that space was ever supposed to hold. Nobody at Chrysler had drawn up plans for this combination because nobody had needed to. The Dart was a commuter car. It was built to carry families to church and salesmen to appointments. Turning it into a platform for the most powerful engine in American production was not a natural next step. It was a deliberate act of mechanical aggression. The challenge was not simply a matter of bolting a big engine into a small car. The 426 was physically wider than the Dart's engine bay could accommodate in stock form. The shock towers on the A-body were positioned close together to support the lighter engines the platform was designed for, and they sat exactly where the Hemi's valve covers needed to go. The firewall was too close, the steering linkage was in the way, the standard motor mounts were in the wrong location and could not handle the weight or the torque. Solving these problems required modifying the car at a structural level. The shock towers were cut and reshaped. The firewall was pushed back. The steering was rerouted. New motor mounts were fabricated in positions that could handle the Hemi's mass without cracking under repeated hard launches. The transmission crossmember was relocated. The driveshaft tunnel was widened. The radiator had to be repositioned to clear the engine's height. The oil pan was a custom unit designed to fit around the A-body's front suspension crossmember. Headers replaced the cast iron exhaust manifolds because there was simply no room for the stock pieces. Every fluid line, every hose, every cable that ran through the engine compartment had to be rerouted around an engine that occupied space those components were never meant to share. Every one of these changes had to be executed without compromising the structural rigidity of the unibody, because a car that flexed under launch loads would be unpredictable on the strip and dangerous at the speeds it was capable of reaching. The solution worked, but elegance was not part of the equation. Under the hood of a finished Hemi Dart, the engine filled the bay with almost no clearance on any side. Changing spark plugs required patience, skinned knuckles, and a creative relationship with geometry. Routine maintenance meant removing components just to reach other components behind them. None of the people buying this car had any illusions about convenience. They were not looking for a car that was easy to live with. They were looking for a car that was impossible to beat. Chrysler did not attempt the conversion on their own assembly line. Hand-fitting a massive V8 into a compact body on a line built for volume production would have disrupted operations and raised questions nobody wanted to answer in a corporate boardroom. Instead, they outsourced the entire job to Hurst Performance Products, the company best known for manufacturing the manual shifters that sat in the center console of nearly every serious American performance car of the era. The arrangement was methodical. Dodge built Dart body shells at their normal assembly plant, fitted with basic interiors, no engine, and no transmission. Those bare shells were loaded onto flatbed trucks and shipped to Hearst, where a crew of specialists went to work. The engine bay modifications, the subframe reinforcements, the Hemi installation, the heavy-duty transmission, the upgraded rear axle, all of it was done by hand. Every car spent days in the shop while the conversion was completed, tested, and inspected. The men doing the work were not production workers pulling shifts on a rotating schedule. They were fabricators and mechanics who understood race cars, and they treated each build accordingly. The tolerances were tighter than anything Dodge's own assembly plant would have demanded, because the forces these cars would experience on the strip left no room for approximate fitment. A motor mount that shifted under a 5,000 RPM launch could put the fan through the radiator. A drive shaft out of balance at extreme speed could tear the tunnel open. Every component was installed as though failure would end the program, because for the people buying these cars, a mechanical failure at full speed was not an abstraction. It was a real and present possibility that the warranty exclusion made explicitly clear. When the cars were finished, they were shipped back to Dodge and fed into the dealer network. There were no press events, there was no advertising campaign, there was no brochure with a smiling couple and a golden retriever in the back seat. The Hemi Dart was a tool, and it was distributed to the people who needed that specific tool. Most of them already had a trailer, a set of slicks, and a class to run in before the car ever arrived. The dealer was not selling a dream, he was filling an order. The Hearst facility itself was not a glamorous operation. It was a working shop with lifts, welding rigs, and parts staged on rolling carts. The smell was cutting oil and exhaust. The noise was grinders and impact wrenches. Each dart arrived as a shell and left as something its original designers would barely have recognized. The transformation was total, but it happened in a space that looked more like a racing garage than a factory. These were race cars, and they were built the way race cars had always been built, by hand, by people who understood what the car would face and what it needed to survive. The weight reduction program at Hearst was systematic and unsentimental. The steel hood was replaced with a fiberglass unit that incorporated a functional cold air scoop. The front fenders were pulled off and fiberglass replacements went on. The side windows were replaced with thinner material to save a few more pounds. Sound deadening was stripped from every surface. Seam sealer in non-critical areas was eliminated. The heater was deleted. The radio was gone. Carpeting was removed or replaced with the thinnest mat available. Anywhere the team could cut weight without compromising the structural path from the engine mounts through the chassis to the rear tires, they cut it. The result was a car that looked, from across a parking lot, like a plain Dodge Dart. The kind of car a secretary drove to work or a retired man took to the hardware store on Saturday morning. Up close, the differences were unmistakable. The body panels did not feel like steel when you knocked on them. The windows looked different. The interior was stripped to a degree that suggested the car had been robbed rather than built that way on purpose. The contrast between appearance and intent was part of what made the Hemi Dart so disorienting to anyone who encountered one for the first time, especially at a traffic light. It looked like nothing. It sounded like the end of the world. That deception was not accidental. The Dart's profile was one of the most anonymous shapes on American roads in 1968. It blended into parking lots and gas station lines without drawing a second glance. Dozens of them sat in driveways across suburban America with slant sixes under the hood and grocery bags on the back seat. The Hemi version used that anonymity as camouflage. Pull up to a stoplight next to a Chevelle or a GTO, and the other driver would see a Dart. He would see the car his neighbor's wife drove. He would not see the 426 cubic inches sitting behind the grille until it was far too late to matter. The dealer experience for a Hemi Dart buyer was unlike anything else in the American automotive market. There was no test drive. There was no negotiation over paint colors or option packages. The car came the way Hearst built it, and the list of things it did not include was longer than the list of things it did. What it did come with was a set of documents that made the terms of ownership unmistakably clear. The warranty paperwork excluded the drivetrain. Chrysler's standard new car warranty covered the body, the frame, and the basic electrical system. But the engine, the transmission, the clutch, the rear axle, and everything connected to making the car move were explicitly excluded from coverage. If the Hemi dropped a valve at 6,000 RPM on your third pass down the strip, that was your problem. If the transmission failed under a hard shift, you paid for the rebuild yourself. Chrysler was not pretending this was a normal car, and they were not willing to absorb the cost of what would inevitably happen when customers used it exactly the way it was designed to be used. That honesty was, in its own way, a kind of respect. Every other muscle car on the market in 1968 came with some version of the same fiction, that it was really a street car, that the horsepower was there for highway passing, that the 4-speed manual transmission was for spirited weekend driving. The Hemi Dart dispensed with all of it. You were buying a race car. If something broke because you raced it, you fixed it yourself, because that was what racers did. The absence of the warranty was not a penalty. It was an acknowledgement that the people buying this car did not need anyone to protect them from it. The performance of the Hemi Dart in competition was exactly what Chrysler had designed it to deliver. When the first cars reached the hands of experienced superstock racers, the elapsed times confirmed what the engineering promised. The combination of the 426 Hemi in a stripped lightweight A-body was faster than anything the competition had in the same class. Experienced drivers were running deep into the 10-second range on the quarter mile, and the best of them were dipping below that barrier with minimal preparation beyond what the car came with straight out of the crate. The sound alone told you something was different. An idling Hemi had a distinct, uneven lope that no other American V8 reproduced. The aggressive camshaft overlap that gave the engine its high RPM breathing characteristics created an exhaust note closer to a heartbeat than a mechanical hum. At full throttle, the sound became a physical presence, a sustained detonation that you felt in your chest before you processed it as noise. Staging the car at the line was its own ritual. The Hemi Dart ran on drag slicks that were wider than anything the Dart's wheel wells were originally designed to accept. The rear suspension was set up for weight transfer, not comfort. When the driver staged, held the brake, and brought the engine up to launch RPM, the entire car trembled with stored energy. When the light went green and the clutch dropped, all of that energy went into the pavement at once. The acceleration was violent in a way that specifications cannot convey. The Hemi Dart did not build speed gradually. It detonated off the line with a force that compressed the rear suspension to its stops, lifted the front wheels clear of the pavement, and covered the first 60 feet in a barely controlled explosion of noise and tire smoke. Drivers who raced these cars described the launch as something you endured rather than directed. You held the wheel, you managed the shift points, and you tried to keep the car somewhere near the center of your lane, while the Hemi attempted to rotate the entire vehicle around the rear axle. The trap speeds at the end of the quarter told the rest of the story. A competitive Hemi Dart was crossing the finish line at speeds that placed it alongside purpose-built drag machines running in higher, less restricted classes. It was overqualified for the category it had been built to dominate. The sanctioning bodies did not take long to react. When one manufacturer's entry is consistently and significantly faster than everything else in its class, the competitive balance of the entire category collapses. The NHRA had seen this before, and they had tools to address it. The primary mechanism was reclassification, moving the dominant car into a category where it faced stiffer competition from vehicles with more displacement, more modifications, or fewer restrictions. It was a tool designed to preserve competitive racing, not to punish innovation, but the practical effect was the same. A car that had been built to win in one class was being told to go somewhere else and try again. The Hemi Dart and its Plymouth counterpart, the Hemi Barracuda, were both moved into tougher classes. It was a backhanded compliment. The cars were too fast for the class they were built to dominate, which was precisely what Chrysler had set out to accomplish. The reclassification changed the competitive landscape, but it did not make the cars slow. Even against stiffer opposition, the lightweight A-bodies with the 426 remained serious contenders. The engine was too powerful, and the car was too light for a simple class reassignment to neutralize it. This pattern, building a machine so dominant that the governing body rewrites its own rules in response, became one of the defining stories of 1960s American motorsport. The Hemi Dart did not merely compete in its class, it broke the class. And when the class was rebuilt around it, the car kept winning anyway. The Dodge Dart was not the only car to emerge from this program. Plymouth ran a parallel effort with its own A-body, the Barracuda. The Plymouth version carried the same 426 Hemi, went through a similar conversion process at Hearst, and was sold under identical terms. Together, the Hemi Dart and the Hemi Barracuda represented Chrysler's full commitment to dominating the lightest stock classes in professional drag racing. The two cars were mechanically almost identical. The differences were cosmetic: body panels, badging, and the dealer network that sold them. A Dodge man walked into his Dodge dealer and bought the Dart. A Plymouth man walked into his Plymouth dealer and bought the Barracuda. Brand loyalty ran deep in the 1960s, and Chrysler understood that a racer who had grown up driving Plymouths was not going to switch to Dodge just because the Dart got a Hemi first. The engine, the transmission, the suspension modifications, and the warranty exclusions were the same in both. Both competed in the same classes with the same results, and if you lined them up at the starting line, the difference in elapsed time came down to the driver, not the badge on the trunk lid. The Barracuda also served as proof that the concept was not a fluke. When both cars ran identical times with identical consistency, it confirmed that the speed came from the combination of engine and platform, not from any individual advantage or a particularly well-prepared example. The existence of both versions also underlined something about the program that was easy to overlook. This was not a skunk works project or a rogue engineering exercise that slipped past management. Chrysler committed two separate divisions, two separate dealer networks, and two separate sets of production codes to building and selling these cars. It was a coordinated corporate decision to build the fastest stock class drag cars in America, and both divisions did it without offering a warranty on the drivetrain of either one. The Hemi Dart was never meant to last. It was built to race, and race cars live hard lives. They get crashed, stripped for parts, modified beyond recognition by subsequent owners who need a specific component more than they need a complete car. Of the roughly 80 Hemi Darts that came out of the program, a fraction survive today in anything close to their original configuration. The ones that do survive are among the most sought-after Mopar vehicles in existence. When a documented Hemi Dart appears at a major collector car auction, it draws attention that reaches well beyond the usual muscle car market. These are not cars that people buy to drive on weekends. They are purchased by collectors who understand what they represent. A moment in American automotive history when a major corporation decided that winning a specific category of racing mattered enough to build a car that had no other reason to exist. The provenance matters more than the paint. A documented build sheet, a Hearst conversion tag, a traceable history back to the original purchasing dealer. Those are the details that separate a genuine Hemi Dart from the stories people tell about one they saw once at a track in 1969. What makes a surviving Hemi Dart remarkable is not what it is worth today. It is what it was when it was new. A car sold without a warranty, without comfort, without any concession to the idea that an automobile should be pleasant to own. It was brutal by design, brutal on purpose, and brutal with the full knowledge and consent of every person involved in putting it on the road. No one at Chrysler ever called it a street car. No brochure tried to sell it as one. No salesman suggested you take it to work on Monday morning. The Hemi Dart was the logical conclusion of an arms race that had no finish line, and the warranty exclusion was not a flaw or an oversight. It was the most honest thing an American car company did in the 1960s. They built a machine that could outrun nearly anything on 4 wheels, put it on a dealer lot with a price tag and a handshake, and let the buyer decide what happened next. Some of the people who lined up against one at the strip are still telling stories about what that sounded like. There are more machines like this one, cars that Detroit built in back rooms and never put in a brochure. That story is in the next video on screen. If you made it to the end, hit subscribe. I will see you in the next one.